Yeah, so what brought me into work with MAF, a big thing was a passion for flying and for aviation that I've had ever since I was a kid, and I believe that's something that God gave me to then use for His glory. And yeah, as I grew as a Christian and grew in my faith through high school, I really felt convicted that I should use my skills and passions to serve God and to glorify Him. So yeah, from there I got in contact with MAF and kind of went from there. Some of the big influences in that were at my old church, Kepert Baptist, which I grew up in. There was an ex-MAF pilot there, and also my sister, who I'm very close with and who's also in missions at the moment. So yeah, I got in contact with MAF to see what opportunities they had, and they said there's a place in Arnhem. So yeah, I've been up here for about 2.5 years now, and I'm flying 3 days a week. So I'll fly out to very isolated Aboriginal homelands and communities, giving all kinds of support, both physical and spiritual. And yeah, 1 day a week I'm in the office looking after our tablets which pilots use as part of our flight planning and things. What I love most about working up here is seeing change happen in the homelands and being able to support the homelands and keep them running. So up until very recently, most of the homelands didn't have any schooling, so a lot of the kids would just live out there and grow up without school. But in the last year or so, a school started up, and MAF's been a big part of that, flying teachers out to the homelands regularly to stay for a day or a few days a week. So that's a really positive change that we've seen. Also, in a spiritual sense, we often do flights out to homelands on a Sunday to support them, and we run a small church service which Craig came along to. That was a great time today. And we also support a lot of local Yolngu Christians. We give them training and things. So the motto for MAF is Flying for Life, and for me that means a few things. There's a very literal sense of saving lives. So when people get sick out in the homeland, we'll do a medevac to bring them into Gove. We also take doctors and nurses, dentists as well, out on a regular basis to do checkups with people living out in the homelands. It also means a lot in the spiritual sense. We do a lot of work with a lot of different Christian organisations and Christian individuals, both Yolngu and Western, and we enable them to get out to homelands and preach the gospel. So seeing the gospel get preached, and then of course it's up to God and the Holy Spirit what He does with that. But yeah, being able to enable that and encourage local Christians is a real privilege. So there are a lot of difficulties that the Yolngu face up in Arnhem Land. There's a lot of them struggle with drugs and alcohol, and sometimes child abuse and domestic violence. And we've seen the gospel work to slowly bring about change, especially in certain individuals. There's a guy named Mark who was telling me how 20 years ago he was addicted to alcohol and drugs, and he was living in one of the bigger towns, but then he moved back into his homeland called Gungan, and being there with a smaller close-knit community, as well as coming to Christ and experiencing the freedom that Christ brings, allowed him and his wife to break their addictions. So family is very important to the Yolngu. They have a very different way of looking at the world and very different perspective and priorities to what we would do in the Western world. And so they will always refer to each other by kinship names like brother or sister, wawa or yapa in their language, as well as uncle, auntie, all the rest of it. They have a lot more of those names than we do. And so when we took Craig out to the homeland earlier today, they were telling Craig all about their family, and most of the community is one big family, extended with cousins and things, and they're explaining, this is where we come from, this is our family, our relationships, because that's what's really important to them, whereas if we were meeting new people we might talk about our job and things like that, but to them family is the number one. So I've been adopted by a guy in a homeland called Wonderboy, and so often when I meet Nyulngu they'll ask me, Wawa, who adopted you? And then I'll say, oh, this guy did from Wonderboy, and they'll say, oh, you call me by this relationship term, and that breaks down a lot of barriers. So the homelands are quite well set up and somewhat self-sufficient overall, so a lot of them have a school and a clinic and a few other things. Some of them have solar power, some are run off generators, and the school and the clinic are run by a mix of local Yolngu who live in the community as well as Western workers who come out to help. So for example, one homeland called Guramaru, there's a school there which is run by a Yolngu lady called Mary, and one day a week we fly out a Western teacher called Therese. She goes out to helps to train up Mary as well as provide lesson plannings and things like that. And it's a similar story in the clinic. There's a local Yolngu worker there who can do things, and then when they need a bit of assistance then we can bring in a Western worker to again help to train them up in the ways of Western medicine. Of course they have their own traditional medicine which is very different. And yeah, the communities are generally very well set up. There's an airstrip right next to most of them. So knowing that Jesus is Lord of all, He's the name above all names, He's risen from the dead, and that at the end of days all tongues and all nations will bow and there'll be people from everywhere worshipping in heaven, encourages me, because I know that in heaven I'll be worshipping alongside Yolngu who I've potentially had a difference in their lives and a part of bringing them towards the gospel. So to anyone who's considering mission work, I really encourage you to pursue that path. Definitely think about it, pray about it a lot, because the call to mission in the Bible is a very general call. It's common for people to look at missionaries and say, oh, they're very special, they must have a perfect Christian life and a specific call in their life. And some people certainly do get specific calls to go to a certain place and do a certain thing, but there's a very general call to bring the gospel to all nations and to all peoples. So I really encourage you, if you're thinking about mission, to get in contact with a couple of mission agencies. Think about places where you might want to go or where you feel God's leading you. Definitely talk to your pastor, maybe your parents, your small group leaders, any people who can help you to work through what potential options are out there. Think about your skills and your giftings, what you could do to use what God's given you to give back to God.